Think about the last time you decided to change something. Maybe it was your health. Maybe it was your career. Maybe it was a habit you had been meaning to build for years. Waking up earlier, reading more, spending less, saving more, moving your body, finishing what you start. Whatever it was, you remember the feeling. That moment of decision, that quiet fire, the sense that this time was going to be different. You made the commitment. You maybe even told someone. You wrote it down. You felt it. And then a few days passed, maybe a few weeks if you were lucky. And somewhere along the way, quietly, almost without noticing, you stopped. Not because the goal no longer mattered. Not because you decided it wasn't worth it, but because the feeling that got you started simply faded. And without that feeling, the action faded with it. This is the consistency problem. And it is the most common human struggle that no one talks about honestly. We talk about starting. We celebrate new beginnings. We share the launch, the announcement, the first day photo. What we rarely discuss is day 22, or week 7, or month 4, when the excitement is long gone, when the results feel slow, when the discipline you needed never really showed up, and when the easiest thing in the world is to quietly let it go. Most people are very good at starting. They are not as good at continuing. And the gap between those two things, between beginning and sustaining, is where most goals go to die. This audiobook is about that gap. It is not a book about motivation. Motivation is not the answer. In fact, one of the core ideas we will explore together is that relying on motivation is one of the primary reasons people fail to stay consistent. Motivation is a feeling, and like all feelings, it is temporary. It rises and falls. It is available sometimes and completely absent other times. If your plan to stay consistent depends on feeling motivated, then your plan has a fatal flaw built right into it. This book is about something more durable, something that works even when the feeling is gone. It is about systems, identity, discipline, and the quiet art of showing up, not because you feel like it, but because you have decided that who you are and what you want require it. We are going to move through this together, slowly, thoughtfully, with honesty about how hard this actually is, but also with clarity about how possible it becomes when you understand what consistency is really built on. By the time you finish listening, you will understand why motivation fails you. You will understand the mental resistance that makes follow through so difficult. You will have a clear picture of the systems and mindset that make consistency not just possible, but natural. And you will have heard the stories of people who struggled with exactly what you struggle with and who found their way through. This is not a book that will hype you up for 48 hours and then leave you right back where you started. This is a book that will change the way you think about effort, identity, and long-term progress. Quietly, firmly, permanently. Let's begin. To understand why consistency is so hard to build, we have to start by understanding motivation, what it actually is, where it comes from, and why it is such an unreliable foundation for any serious goal. Motivation, at its core, is an emotional state. It is the feeling of wanting to do something. It is energy directed toward a purpose, and in those early moments, when a new idea excites you, when you first see the possibility of change, when you imagine what your life could look like, motivation can feel powerful. It feels like fuel. It feels like everything you need. The problem is that motivation is produced by your brain under specific conditions, and those conditions change constantly. When you first encounter a new goal, there is novelty, there is possibility, there is the emotional charge of imagining a better future. Your brain responds to that novelty by releasing dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with anticipation and reward. That dopamine release is what you feel as motivation. It feels good, it makes you want to act, and so you do. But novelty fades. By definition, it cannot last. The thing that was exciting on day 1 is no longer new on day 14. The brain's response decreases. The dopamine quiet ends, and without that emotional charge, motivation drops, not because you are weak, not because you don't want the goal anymore, but because the brain is doing exactly what it is designed to do. Moving on from what is no longer new. This is the first reason motivation fails. It is tied to novelty, and novelty is temporary. The second reason is that motivation is deeply tied to mood. And mood is one of the most variable things in human experience. Your mood changes based on your sleep, your nutrition, your stress levels, your relationships, the weather, the news, a conversation you had that morning, a thought that surfaced unbidden at 2 in the afternoon. When you feel good, action feels easy. When you feel flat, tired, anxious or low, even the smallest tasks can feel insurmountable. If your consistency depends on your mood being right, then your consistency is at the mercy of your nervous system, your hormones, your circumstances, and 1,000 variables you have no control over. That is not a plan. That is wishful thinking. The third reason motivation fails is what psychologists sometimes call the effort paradox. Motivation often feels highest before you begin, and lowest at the exact moments when sustained effort is most required. Think about it. When you are sitting comfortably, imagining working out, the idea feels appealing. The moment you are actually in the middle of a difficult exercise, the motivation to push through is far less available than the motivation to stop. We are designed to conserve energy. The brain and body work together to minimize unnecessary effort. This is not a character flaw. It is evolutionary biology. For hundreds of thousands of years, conserving energy was survival. Rest when you can. Avoid unnecessary exertion. The problem is that the goals we set in the modern world require sustained, deliberate, often difficult effort, and our ancient brain has no real enthusiasm for that. So when the effort becomes real, when the workout is hard, when the page is blank, when the conversation is uncomfortable, when the work is tedious, motivation tends to disappear precisely when you need it most. This is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. And until you understand it, you will keep being surprised by it. There is also what we might call the motivation trap. Many people wait to feel motivated before they act. They tell themselves they will start when they feel ready, when they feel inspired, when the timing feels right, and they wait. Days pass, months. The goal remains untouched because the feeling never arrives at full strength, or when it does arrive, it fades before real momentum is built. This is backwards. Research in behavioral psychology consistently shows that action precedes motivation more reliably than motivation precedes action. You do not wait to feel like doing something and then do it. You do the thing, and then, often, the feeling follows. Motion creates emotion. Starting, even imperfectly, even reluctantly, even at half the energy you wish you had, creates the psychological conditions for motivation to arise. But if you are waiting for the feeling first, you are waiting for something that may never come. And even if it does come, it will not stay. Motivation is a visitor, not a resident. You can welcome it when it arrives. You cannot depend on it being there. There is also the comparison problem. Social media and the culture of highlight reels have made it easy to observe other people who appear highly motivated all the time. You see the 6:30 morning workout posts, the ambitious entrepreneurs who claim to love the grind, the authors who write every single day without fail, and you think they must feel differently than I do. They must have access to a level of motivation I don't have. They don't. What they have is not a different emotional experience. What they have is a different relationship with the moments when motivation is absent. They have learned, or been forced, to act anyway, to build systems that make action the default rather than the exception, to tie their identity to their behavior rather than their feelings. The motivation you see in those posts is often the result of long-term consistency, not the cause of it. They look motivated because they have been showing up, not the other way around. Understanding this changes everything, because if motivation is unreliable, if it is temporary, mood-dependent, and least available when most needed, then building your consistency on motivation is building on sand. Every time the tide comes in, every time your mood dips or the excitement fades, the whole structure washes away. And you are back at the beginning, wondering what went wrong, questioning your discipline, wondering if you are simply not someone who can stay consistent. You are, but not this way. The path to consistency does not run through motivation. It runs through something steadier, something you build rather than wait for, something that does not depend on how you feel today. We will spend the rest of this book exploring exactly what that is. But first, we need to look at one more enemy of consistency, one that is even more powerful than the absence of motivation. We need to look at resistance. Resistance is the force inside you that opposes effort. It is the voice that says not yet, the pull toward comfort, the invisible gravity that makes the couch feel more reasonable than the gym, the distraction more appealing than the work, the delay more sensible than the beginning. The author Stephen Pressfield called it simply the resistance. He described it as the enemy of creative work, the force that sits between you and the thing you know you should be doing. But resistance is not limited to creative work. It shows up everywhere effort is required. It shows up when you need to study, when you need to have a hard conversation, when you need to exercise, when you need to budget, when you need to practice, when you need to push through the plateau that follows initial progress. Resistance is universal. It visits everyone who has ever tried to do something meaningful. And if you do not understand it, if you take it personally, or mistake it for a signal that you are on the wrong path, it will stop you every time. The first thing to understand about resistance is that it is not rational. It does not evaluate whether the thing you are trying to do is good for you. It does not weigh the long-term benefits against the short-term discomfort. It simply says this requires effort, and effort is uncomfortable, so let's not. The brain is wired for comfort seeking. This is not a flaw in your character. It is the result of millions of years of evolution. Safety is comfort. Rest is comfort. The familiar is comfort. Anything new, difficult, or uncertain triggers a low-level threat response, not a dramatic alarm. Most of the time you won't even notice it consciously, but it is there, quietly nudging you away from effort and toward ease. This is why so many people find it easier to watch content about doing something than to actually do the thing. Watching someone work out is comfortable. Working out is not. Reading about starting a business feels stimulating. The actual work of starting a business involves uncertainty, discomfort, and the very real possibility of failure. The brain knows the difference and steers accordingly. The second dimension of resistance is avoidance, and avoidance is far more sophisticated than simple laziness. Avoidance is a system. It learns your patterns, your triggers, your weak points, and it adapts. It does not always look like sitting on the couch doing nothing. Often it looks like doing something, just not the right thing. You avoid the difficult writing project by organizing your desk. You avoid the hard workout by doing an easier one and calling it enough. You avoid the important phone call by answering emails instead. You avoid finishing the thing by endlessly refining the beginning. Avoidance wears the costume of productivity. It makes you feel busy while keeping you safely away from the real effort, the real risk, the real discomfort. This is why self-awareness is such a critical skill in building consistency. You have to learn to see your own avoidance patterns. To notice when you are busy, but not effective. To recognize the particular flavor of resistance that shows up most reliably in your life, and to call it by its name. The third form resistance takes is mental fatigue. And this one is subtle, because it is real. Decision fatigue is a documented phenomenon. The more decisions you make in a day, the lower the quality of your later decisions, and the harder it becomes to make them at all. Willpower operates in a similar way. It is not infinite. The more you draw on it, the more you resist temptations, make judgment calls, manage emotions, solve problems, the less of it is available when you need it next. This is why the end of the day is so difficult for consistency. By the time evening comes, you have already made hundreds of decisions. You have managed your energy, your time, your interactions. You are running low, and in that depleted state, the couch wins. The phone wins. The habit you were trying to build loses. Not because you are weak, but because you waited until your weakest moment to test your resolve. Understanding this is not an excuse. It is information. It tells you something important. If your habits and goals require significant willpower, at the time of day when your willpower is most depleted, they will fail consistently. You need to structure your life so that the important things happen when you have the most capacity. Or, you need to build systems that reduce the need for willpower in the first place. We will get to those systems. But for now, simply recognizing that mental fatigue is a real force working against your consistency is an important step. There is also the role of emotions more broadly. Resistance does not just use fatigue. It uses anxiety. It uses perfectionism. It uses fear of failure and fear of success. It uses the very legitimate discomfort of doing something that matters, where the stakes feel real and the uncertainty is genuine. Perfectionism is one of resistance's most elegant disguises. It tells you that you should not start until conditions are right, until you know enough, until you have the perfect plan, the perfect environment, the perfect amount of time. It sounds like high standards. It looks like carefulness. But it is fear dressed in the clothes of excellence. And it keeps more people stuck than almost any other form of resistance. The perfectionist does not start the business because the plan isn't perfect yet. Does not publish the work because it could be better. Does not go to the gym because they don't have the right program yet. Does not have the conversation because they don't know exactly what to say, and so they wait, and refine, and prepare, and nothing changes. Progress does not require perfection. It requires movement. Imperfect movement in a good direction is worth infinitely more than perfect stillness. Resistance also uses comparison as a weapon. It shows you someone who is further along than you, more skilled, more consistent, more successful, and uses that comparison to undermine your willingness to continue. Why bother, it whispers, when you are so far behind, when you will never be that good, when the gap feels too large to close? This is a lie. Every person who is skilled, consistent, and successful was once a beginner. Every person who shows up reliably was once someone who didn't. The comparison is not between who you are and who they are. The real comparison, the only meaningful one, is between who you are today and who you were yesterday. Understanding resistance doesn't make it go away. It will always be there. But understanding it changes your relationship with it. Instead of treating it as a sign that something is wrong, you can treat it as a sign that something is right, that you are trying to do something that matters, something that costs something, something worth doing. Resistance is always greatest around the things that would most change your life. That is not a coincidence. The question is not how to eliminate resistance. The question is how to act in spite of it. That is the actual skill, and it is learned. Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus was 34 years old, living in a mid-sized city, working a job that paid the bills but did not excite him. He was intelligent, creative, and had big ideas about what his life could look like. He wanted to be healthier. He wanted to write. He had been carrying around the idea for a book for nearly 6 years. He wanted to be more financially stable. He wanted to learn a new skill, maybe something in design or technology, something that could open new doors. He was not someone who lacked ambition. He had plenty of it. What he lacked was follow-through. Every few months, something would ignite in Marcus. He would read an article about someone who had transformed their body in a year, or listen to an interview with a successful author who talked about writing every single day, or watch a documentary about someone who built something from nothing. And the fire would start. He would feel it. That surge of energy, that sense of possibility, the certainty that he was ready to change. He would buy the book about writing. He would sign up for the gym membership. He would download the budgeting app. He would tell his partner about his new plan with genuine excitement in his voice. And he would start. He always started. The first few days were always the best. He would wake up early and write for 30 minutes before work. He would go to the gym at lunch. He would track his spending with careful attention. He felt good. He felt proud of himself. He felt like this time was different. And then something would happen. It was never one dramatic thing. It was always small. Maybe work got busy, and he stayed late 3 days in a row, and the writing routine disappeared. Maybe he got a minor cold and missed the gym for a week, and never quite found his way back. Maybe he had an unexpected expense that made the budgeting feel futile, and so he stopped tracking. Maybe he just had a bad day, felt low and uninspired, and told himself he would pick it back up tomorrow. And tomorrow became next week, and next week became maybe next month. Marcus was stuck in what you might call the start-stop cycle, a cycle that many people know intimately. You begin, you have momentum, something disrupts the momentum, the motivation dips, you stop, time passes, the motivation returns, usually triggered by some new inspiration, and you begin again. Different goal, or the same goal repackaged, but the same arc. Launch, momentum, disruption, stop. Launch, momentum, disruption, stop. What was particularly painful for Marcus was not just the lack of progress, though that was painful enough. It was what the cycle was doing to his identity. Every time he stopped, a small voice would add another piece of evidence to a growing internal story. You're someone who doesn't follow through. You start things but never finish them. You talk about change, but you don't actually change. He didn't believe those things consciously, but unconsciously, the pattern was building a case. And each time he started again, part of him was already waiting for the moment he would quit, because the pattern was so established. He tried different approaches. He tried habit trackers, checking off boxes in an app that he found satisfying for about 11 days. He tried accountability partners, which worked until his friend also lost momentum, and they silently agreed to stop checking in. He tried morning routines he read about online, 5:30 wake, ups and cold showers and journaling, and lasted a spirited 5 days before the alarm felt cruel and unreasonable, and he turned it off and told himself he would try again when life was less busy. He tried motivation. He watched videos that fired him up. He made vision boards. He listened to podcasts about success on his commute and felt energized for the 15 minutes after each episode, and then returned to his usual patterns. The motivation was real while it lasted. It just never lasted long enough to do its job. The thing that Marcus did not yet understand, the thing that none of his efforts had addressed, was that his entire approach to consistency was built on the wrong foundation. He was trying to sustain action with feeling. Every strategy he tried was essentially a strategy to feel more motivated for longer, and the problem is not solvable that way. Motivation will always fade. No amount of videos or vision boards changes that fundamental fact. He also did not understand the role of identity. Marcus thought of himself, in some deep and unexamined way, as someone who struggled with follow-through. That story, built from years of evidence, was not neutral. It was active. It shaped what he expected of himself. It shaped how he interpreted setbacks. It shaped how quickly he gave up when things got hard, because his internal narrative already had the ending written. And he did not understand systems. He was trying to rely on willpower and motivation to override his defaults every single day. But his defaults, his environment, his routines, the path of least resistance in his daily life, were all pointing away from the behaviors he wanted to build. He was trying to swim upstream with no technique, relying entirely on the strength of his initial burst. And eventually, every time, the current one, Marcus is not a cautionary tale. He is a mirror. Most of us have been Marcus at some point. Many of us are Marcus right now. The cycle is not a failure of character. It is a failure of strategy, and strategy can be changed. We will return to Marcus later, but first, let's understand what a better strategy actually looks like. A system is a set of structures, routines, and conditions that make a desired behavior more likely to happen, regardless of how you feel. Motivation asks, "Do I feel like doing this today?" A system doesn't ask. It just creates the conditions where the behavior happens almost automatically. And over time, those automatic behaviors become habits, and habits become identity, and identity becomes who you are. Reliably and consistently, without the exhausting daily negotiation between what you want to do and what you feel like doing. This is the power of systems. They remove the decision. And removing decisions is one of the most underrated tools in building consistency. Think about how many times in a day you make micro decisions about your habits. Should I go to the gym today? Should I work on that project now or later? Should I eat this or that? Should I get up at this time or sleep a little longer? Every one of those decisions is an opportunity for resistance to win. Every time you have to make a choice, you have to overcome inertia, and on days when your energy is low, your mood is flat, or life is complicated, those micro decisions will consistently go the wrong way. Systems eliminate the negotiation. When you have a clear, pre-decided structure for your behavior, you do not have to decide whether to do it. You just do it. The decision was made in advance, when your thinking was clear and your intentions were strong. The system holds that decision in place so that your tired, depleted, resistant self does not have to recreate it every day. The most effective systems share several characteristics. They are specific, they are realistic, they are tied to the environment, and they reduce friction. Specificity matters because vague intentions almost never lead to consistent action. Saying I will exercise more is not a system, it is a wish. A system sounds more like, I will work out for 30 minutes every weekday morning at 6:30 in the spare room, using the program saved on my phone. Every detail reduces the number of decisions required in the moment. You know when, you know where, you know what. The only thing left is to do it. Realism is critical because systems that demand too much are systems that collapse. Many people design their ideal routine, the one that would work perfectly if they had unlimited time, energy, and willpower, and then try to implement it in their actual life. It fails within days. The better approach is to design a system around your minimum viable behavior. What is the smallest version of this habit that you could realistically do even on your hardest days? This might feel like lowering your standards. It is not. It is respecting the reality of human psychology. A 10-minute workout done consistently over a year will produce more results than a 90-minute program you abandon after 2 weeks. A page of writing every day will produce more than occasional bursts of 5 pages, followed by long silences. The standard is not the size of the action. The standard is the reliability of showing up. Environment design is one of the most powerful and underused tools in building consistency. Your environment shapes your behavior far more than your willpower does. Research in behavioral economics consistently shows that people overestimate their self-control and underestimate how much their choices are shaped by what is visible, accessible, and easy in their surroundings. If you want to read more, put a book on your pillow or beside your coffee maker. If you want to work out, lay out your clothes the night before so the first thing you see in the morning is the signal to begin. If you want to eat better, don't keep foods that undermine that goal in your home. If you want to write, set up your workspace in advance. Open the document and have everything ready before you sit down. The goal of environment design is to make the right behavior the easiest behavior. Right now, for most people, the environment makes the wrong behaviors easiest. The phone is on the desk, full of notifications. The television is in the most comfortable room. The unhealthy food is the most accessible. If your environment is organized around convenience, it will deliver convenience, and convenience is rarely the same thing as growth. Reducing friction means removing the obstacles that stand between you and your desired behavior. Friction is anything that makes the action harder to start. It might be physical, the gym bag not packed, the equipment not ready. It might be cognitive, not knowing exactly what to do when you begin. It might be logistical, trying to build a habit that requires resources or time you don't reliably have. Every point of friction is a place where resistance can win. If getting to the gym requires 20 minutes of driving, finding parking, changing, and then working out, the total cost of that habit is high. If you can do a workout at home in the time it would take to drive to the gym, the friction is dramatically reduced. If writing requires finding your notebook, locating a quiet space, and figuring out what to work on, you will write far less than if you have a designated space, a prepared document, and a clear starting point already established. Routines are a form of system, and they deserve particular attention. A routine is a sequence of behaviors that links together, where each action triggers the next. Morning routines are powerful because the brain learns the sequence and begins to anticipate it. When you wake up and immediately make your coffee, and coffee is linked to sitting at your desk, and sitting at your desk is linked to opening your work, the routine begins to run almost on autopilot. The decision cost drops dramatically. The behavior becomes the default. Build your habits into existing routines wherever possible. Attach new behaviors to things you already do reliably. After I make my morning coffee, I will write for 20 minutes. After I brush my teeth at night, I will read for 15 minutes. After I sit down at my desk, I will spend the first 10 minutes on the most important task before checking anything else. These if-then structures, known in psychology as implementation intentions, dramatically increase the likelihood that the behavior will actually occur. Systems are not a perfect solution. Life will disrupt them. There will be weeks where the routine breaks down, where travel or illness or crisis makes your structure temporarily impossible. What systems give you is a home base to return to. When things go wrong, you do not have to recreate your plan from scratch. You just return to your system. Minimal disruption, maximum recovery. There is a question that shapes your behavior more powerfully than any plan, any system, or any strategy. It is not what do I want to do. It is who do I believe I am. Identity is the story you carry about yourself. It is the set of beliefs, usually implicit, usually formed over years, about what kind of person you are, what you are capable of, and how you typically behave. And it shapes your actions in ways that are often invisible, but almost always decisive. When your identity is aligned with the behavior you are trying to build, consistency becomes dramatically easier. When it is not aligned, consistency requires a constant battle between what you are trying to do and what your internal story says you are. Here is a simple but powerful example. Consider two people who are both trying to stop eating sugar. Someone offers each of them dessert. The first person says, "I am trying not to eat sugar right now." The second person says, "I don't eat sugar." Those statements sound similar, but they represent fundamentally different relationships with the behavior. The first person is fighting their desire. The second person is expressing their identity. The first position is exhausting and requires constant willpower. The second is simply being who they are. Behavior change researchers call this identity-based change. The idea is that sustainable behavior change does not come from changing what you do. It comes from changing who you believe you are. When you genuinely see yourself as a certain kind of person, the behavior flows naturally from that self-concept. It does not require motivation. It does not require willpower. It simply requires being yourself. The challenge, of course, is that you cannot simply decide to have a different identity. You cannot wake up one morning and announce that you are now a disciplined, consistent person and have that belief take hold immediately. Identity is built from evidence. It is the accumulation of what you have done. The votes, as some researchers describe them, that you have cast for a particular kind of person over time. Every time you follow through on a commitment, you cast a vote for the identity of someone who follows through. Every time you act in alignment with your stated values, you cast a vote for the identity of someone with integrity between their words and their actions. Every time you show up, even when you don't feel like it, you cast a vote for the identity of someone who is disciplined. And every time you don't, every skip, every avoidance, every broken promise to yourself, you cast a vote in the other direction. This does not mean a single missed workout defines you. One vote does not win an election. What matters is the overall pattern. The preponderance of evidence. Are the majority of your votes going toward the person you are trying to become, or toward the person you are trying to leave behind? This reframing is important for how you think about setbacks. If you miss a day or a week, the catastrophic thinking that often follows, "I've ruined it, I knew I couldn't do it. What's the point?" is not only inaccurate but actively harmful. It adds negative identity votes. The better response is to see the miss as a single data point in a much larger dataset, and to return to the behavior as quickly as possible. Not to punish yourself, but because returning quickly is itself a vote for who you are choosing to be. Identity change begins with a decision, a genuine decision, not a wish or a hope, but an actual choice about who you are going to be. Not who you are going to try to be, who you are. Spoken in the present tense. I am someone who takes care of my health. I am someone who does the work, even when it's hard. I am someone who keeps commitments to myself. I am reliable. This decision is the beginning of the identity shift, but it is only the beginning. The shift becomes real through action, through the daily, often small, sometimes inconspicuous choices to act in alignment with that identity. Over time, those choices accumulate. The evidence builds. The belief becomes grounded in experience rather than aspiration, and the behavior that once required enormous effort begins to feel simply like what you do. The word identity comes from the Latin idem, meaning the same. Your identity is the thing that remains consistent over time, the part of you that does not change with mood or circumstance. When you build a strong behavioral identity, your consistency is no longer dependent on how you feel on a given day. It is an expression of who you are. And that is a very different thing from something you are trying to do. Ask yourself this honestly. When you imagine the person you are working to become, do you think of them as something you might someday be, or as something you already are, in process, becoming more fully realized? That distinction matters more than it might seem. The person who says, "I want to become disciplined," is always becoming. The person who says, "I am disciplined, and I am building the evidence to prove it," is already there, even if imperfectly. The relationship with the identity is fundamentally different, and so is the behavior that flows from it. Let's talk about what discipline actually is, because it is widely misunderstood. Most people think of discipline as a kind of toughness, a capacity for suffering, the ability to do hard things without complaint, to white-knuckle through discomfort, to force yourself into action through sheer willpower. And while there is certainly an element of discomfort in discipline, this picture misses the essential nature of it. Discipline is not primarily about enduring pain. Discipline is about keeping promises to yourself. It is about deciding what matters, and then acting in alignment with that decision, regardless of how you feel in any given moment. It is the practice of letting your values, rather than your moods, drive your behavior. When understood this way, discipline is not brutal. It is clarifying. It is actually a form of freedom, freedom from the tyranny of mood, from the endless negotiation with yourself, from the guilt and self-doubt that follows when you repeatedly fail to do what you said you would do. Discipline, consistently practiced, produces a kind of inner stability that most people spend their lives searching for. The genuinely disciplined person is not someone who never wants to give up. They feel the pull of avoidance as much as anyone. They have bad days. They face resistance. They experience the dip in energy, the temptation to choose comfort. The difference is not that they do not feel these things. The difference is that they do not make decisions based on them. Think about that carefully. They feel the resistance, and they act anyway. Not because they are immune to it, not because they don't experience it, but because they have established a rule, a personal standard, that operates independently of their emotional state. When the rule says show up, they show up. Full stop. This is what it means to act from values rather than feelings. You decide in advance what kind of person you are, what you do and do not do, what you commit to and what you protect. And then, when the moment comes and the feelings say otherwise, you return to that decision. You do not decide every day. The decision was already made. There is a phrase that captures this well: do it scared, do it tired, do it bored, do it when it does not feel good. Not because suffering is noble, but because the alternative, waiting until conditions are perfect, means you will wait your entire life. Conditions are never perfect. There is always a reason to wait, to delay, to reconsider. Life is always in some degree of chaos. Something is always demanding your attention, your energy, your time. The person who builds discipline learns that the perfect moment is a myth, and that the actual moment, this one, with all its imperfections, is the only one available. One useful concept here is the idea of the 2-minute start. When you are facing resistance and cannot bring yourself to begin, you commit to just 2 minutes. That's all. 2 minutes of writing. 2 minutes on the treadmill. 2 minutes of opening the book. Often, the resistance is in the starting. Once you are in motion, continuing becomes easier. The brain's threat response quiets once the behavior is underway. 2 minutes can become 20 or 40. And even if it doesn't, 2 minutes is better than 0. And 0 is the only truly unrecoverable position. Another aspect of discipline is non-negotiation. Every time you allow yourself to negotiate, every time you engage with the internal debate about whether to do the thing, you give resistance a foothold. Resistance is a skilled negotiator. It will always find a reasonable, sounding argument for why today is the exception, why circumstances make it justified, why you deserve to rest, why you can catch up tomorrow. The moment you start negotiating, you are probably going to lose. The disciplined response to that internal negotiation is to simply not have it, to recognize the negotiation starting and to refuse the invitation. I hear the argument. I'm doing the thing anyway. This is not aggression or suppression. It is clarity. You know what you have decided, and you are acting on it. The feeling does not change the plan. It is worth noting that discipline is not about perfection. The person who misses a day and then spends 3 days in guilt and self-recrimination is not being disciplined. They are being rigid. Discipline is about consistent return, not flawless execution. The athlete misses a training session and comes back the next day. The writer misses a day of writing and opens the document the morning after. The person trying to build a new habit breaks it and restarts without ceremony, without drama, without the long story about what it means. Discipline is also cumulative. Each time you act despite resistance, despite low mood, despite the pull of comfort, you are not just doing the task. You are building the muscle. You are adding evidence to your identity. You are training yourself, literally training your neural pathways, to respond to discomfort with action rather than retreat. Over time, this changes your default. The resistance does not disappear, but your relationship with it shifts. It stops feeling like a signal to stop and starts feeling like the cost of entry to something worth having. This is the long game, and it is the only game worth playing. Everything we have discussed so far, systems, identity, discipline, lays the foundation. But there is also a practical, tactical dimension to consistency that is worth exploring in depth. The question is not just how do you build the mindset for consistency, but how do you engineer your life so that consistency is easier to achieve. The concept of friction reduction deserves more time here because it is so counterintuitive. Most people trying to build consistency focus on adding motivation or willpower, but the far more effective approach is to reduce the resistance that makes inaction the easier choice. Here is a useful mental model. Imagine your desired behavior is at the top of a ramp and the alternative, the comfort behavior, the avoidance behavior, is at the bottom. Right now, for most people, the ramp tilts toward the bottom. Not because you lack character, but because your environment, your defaults, your stored patterns all make the low effort choice the easy choice. Friction reduction is the act of tilting that ramp, making the right behavior the downhill path. One of the most effective friction reduction strategies is preparation. Specifically, preparing for tomorrow's behavior today. The person who prepares their workout clothes, fills their water bottle, sets out their shoes, and reviews their program the night before is not that different from the person who doesn't in terms of intention. But they are dramatically different in terms of what their morning actually looks like. One wakes up and the environment is already pointing toward the behavior. The other wakes up and has to generate all of that activation from scratch at 6 in the morning with a tired brain. Preparation collapses the distance between intention and action. It takes a series of small decisions, what to wear, what to bring, what to do, and moves them to a time when you have more bandwidth. The morning version of you inherits the decisions the evening version of you already made. This is not laziness. This is intelligent design. Another powerful approach is to attach your new habits to existing anchors. You already have a set of reliable behaviors in your day, things you do without thinking, every day, regardless of how you feel. You make coffee, you brush your teeth, you sit down at a desk, you eat lunch, you commute. These existing behaviors are anchors, stable, consistent points in your day. When you attach a new habit to an existing anchor, the old behavior becomes the cue for the new one. The key is specificity. Not just I will meditate in the morning, but after I make my coffee and before I look at my phone, I will sit quietly for 5 minutes. The specificity of the trigger makes it harder to forget, harder to avoid, and easier to build into a genuine routine over time. Reducing digital friction is a particularly relevant form of friction reduction for modern life. The smartphone is perhaps the most powerful consistency tool ever invented. It is engineered to capture and hold attention, designed by teams of highly skilled people whose entire job is to make their app more compelling than whatever you were trying to do. When your phone is nearby, visible and accessible, it will win, reliably. Not because you lack discipline, but because the people who built it are experts in circumventing discipline. The answer is environmental. Move the phone. Put it in another room during your work or practice time. Use app limits or grayscale mode to reduce its reward signal. Charge it outside your bedroom. Do not start your day with it. Every minute of the day that begins with reactive consumption, scrolling, checking, responding, is a minute that sets a passive, reactive tone for what follows. The phone should be a tool you pick up intentionally, not an environment you live inside of. Another tool for making consistency easier is the concept of the never miss twice rule. Perfect streaks are admirable but fragile. Life will break them. Travel, illness, crisis, exhaustion, things happen, routines get disrupted, and the streak ends. Many people, when the streak breaks, abandon the habit entirely. The habit was the streak in their minds, and once the streak is over, there is nothing left to protect. The never miss twice rule reframes this. It says one miss is an accident. 2 misses is the start of a new habit. So your only job, when you miss a day, is to make sure you come back the next day, not eventually. Not when you feel ready, the next day. This one rule, consistently applied, dramatically reduces the damage that interruptions do to long-term consistency. It also removes the pressure of perfection, which in itself makes consistency more sustainable. Finally, making consistency easier requires honest evaluation of your current commitments. Too many goals pursued simultaneously will undermine all of them. The mind can hold only so much in priority focus. The person who is trying to build 6 new habits at once is not ambitious. They are setting themselves up for failure. Not because any single habit is too hard, but because the cognitive load of managing all 6 and the friction points of all 6 combine into an overwhelming weight that no amount of motivation can sustain. Pick 1 or 2. Build those until they are stable, until they are part of your identity and your routine, not things you are still fighting to maintain. Then add the next. Sequentially, not simultaneously. This is not slow. This is the fastest path. Because habits that last compound. Habits that collapse require you to start over, again and again, burning energy and eroding confidence along the way. Progress is a motivator, not motivation in the fleeting, emotion-dependent sense we discussed earlier, but something more grounded and durable. The feeling of moving forward, of seeing evidence that your effort is producing results, is one of the most reliable sources of the energy that keeps people going. The problem is that progress, especially in the early stages of a habit or goal, is often invisible. You work out for 3 weeks, and you do not see dramatic changes in your body. You write for a month, and the book is not done. You practice the skill for 60 days, and you still feel clumsy and slow. And when progress is invisible, it is easy to conclude that it is not happening, that the effort is not working, that you are doing something wrong. That maybe this particular goal is not for you. This is where tracking becomes essential, not as a rigid system of measurement, but as a tool for making the invisible visible. When you track, you create evidence of your effort. You create a record of your consistency. You give yourself data points that show, over time, a pattern that your day-to-day perception may miss entirely. Progress is often non-linear. It moves in spurts and plateaus. There are periods of rapid improvement and periods where nothing seems to change despite consistent effort. Those plateaus are where most people quit. They interpret the absence of visible progress as evidence that progress has stopped, but this is rarely true. What is actually happening, often, is accumulation. The skills, the fitness, the knowledge, the neural pathways are building below the surface, and then, apparently suddenly, a breakthrough occurs. The level jumps, the new capability appears, and the plateau is revealed to have been not a waste of time, but a necessary phase. The way to survive plateaus is to track the input, not just the output. Track the behavior, not just the result. If you are tracking daily, did I show up today? Yes or no? You always have evidence of your consistency, even when the outcomes feel static. That evidence is meaningful. It tells you that you are doing your part. And it gives you a legitimate basis for patience, which is the one quality that separates people who achieve long-term goals from people who abandon them prematurely. Small wins are another powerful mechanism for sustaining consistency. A small win is any concrete evidence of progress, no matter how modest. Finishing a chapter, completing a workout you almost skipped, making a healthy meal when the easier option was available, having a hard conversation instead of avoiding it. These small wins do several things. They provide immediate positive feedback, which reinforces the behavior neurologically. They build the identity of someone who achieves things, and they create momentum, a psychological sense of forward movement that makes the next action easier to take. Research on what drives performance in the workplace found that the single greatest motivator of sustained engagement was not money, recognition, or status. It was a sense of progress, specifically the feeling of moving forward on work that matters. This applies far beyond the workplace. Human beings are deeply motivated by progress. We need to feel that our effort is doing something, that we are moving towards something, that the expenditure of energy is not wasted. Celebrating small wins is not about being satisfied with insufficient progress. It is about acknowledging the reality of what you have done in a way that encourages you to continue. Many high-performing, ambitious people resist celebrating small wins because it feels like settling. But you can celebrate the small win and simultaneously keep your eyes on the larger goal. The celebration is not a signal that you are done. It is fuel for the next phase. Another powerful aspect of tracking is pattern recognition. When you keep records of your behavior over time, you begin to see things you cannot see when you are just living inside the day-to-day experience. You may notice that you consistently struggle on Tuesday afternoons, that your habits hold strongly through the week and collapse on weekends. That stress at work directly correlates with skipped habits, that you are more consistent when you do a specific preparatory action the night before. This information is gold. It tells you where your system needs reinforcing. It shows you the fault lines before they become breaks, and it allows you to build structures that address your specific vulnerabilities, rather than just hoping that general willpower will compensate for specific weaknesses it cannot actually fix. Momentum, ultimately, is the goal, not the breathless, caffeinated momentum of an exciting new beginning, but the steady, compounding momentum of consistent small actions over a long period of time. This kind of momentum is quiet. It does not feel dramatic, but it is the most powerful force in personal development. It is the compound interest of the behavioral world. Small, consistent actions, repeated over months and years, produce results that are not just better than sporadic bursts of intense effort. They are incomparably better. The math of compounding is not intuitive, which is why so many people underestimate it, but anyone who has watched what daily habits produce over 2 or 3 years understands it viscerally. You build that momentum by tracking, by celebrating small wins, by seeing the patterns, and by continuing to show up on the days when the momentum does not feel like much. Because those are exactly the days when it is accumulating. Let us return to Marcus. It was a Tuesday evening, a particularly unremarkable one, when something shifted, not dramatically. There was no single revelation, no mentor who appeared with the right words at the right moment, no crisis that forced a reckoning. It was something simpler. He was reading, almost by accident, about the difference between outcome-based goals and identity-based change. And something in the way it was framed landed differently than anything he had encountered before. He had always thought of his goals as things to achieve. Finish the book, lose the weight, save the money. These were outcomes, destination points that would signal success. But the reading was suggesting something different, that the real goal was not the outcome. The real goal was to become the kind of person for whom those outcomes were natural results of who they were. For the first time, Marcus asked himself a question he had never seriously considered. What kind of person do I want to be? Not what do I want to have or achieve. Who do I want to be? He sat with that for longer than he expected, and what he realized, slowly, uncomfortably honestly, was that most of his goals had been about what he wanted to possess or accomplish, not about who he wanted to become. The book was a thing he wanted to have written. The healthy body was a thing he wanted to have. But he had never really committed to being a writer, to being someone who prioritized his health. The distinction was subtle, but it was everything. He made a different kind of decision that evening. Not I will try to write every day, but I am a writer. I write. That is what I do. And with that identity decision made, imperfectly, tentatively, but genuinely, he began to approach the behavior differently. He did not set up an elaborate system overnight. He started with one thing every morning. Before he opened his phone, he would write for 20 minutes. That was it. Not 2 hours. Not a chapter. 20 minutes. He prepared the night before, opened the document, put a glass of water beside his laptop, noted a starting point so he would not waste the 20 minutes deciding where to begin. The first week was not revelatory. Some mornings were better than others. On Thursday, he wrote only 12 minutes before he ran out of time. On Saturday, he skipped entirely because he had told himself he deserved a day off, and then felt vaguely guilty about it all afternoon. But he came back on Sunday, and the week after that, he kept coming back. Not because he felt motivated. Some mornings he felt nothing, but because he had decided this was what he did. It was non-negotiable, not because he forced it, but because he had chosen to be the kind of person for whom it was simply part of the morning. 3 months later, Marcus had completed the first draft of the first 3 chapters of the book he had been carrying around for 6 years. It was not perfect. It was rough in places, unclear in others. But it existed, and it existed because of one 20-minute commitment, repeated with imperfect but genuine consistency, day after day. He had also stopped trying to fix everything at once. He was not attempting simultaneously to overhaul his diet, transform his finances, and build a new exercise routine. He had chosen one thing, built it until it felt like part of his life, rather than a task on a list, and then, around the 5th month, quietly added a 20-minute walk after lunch. Not a run, not a training program, a walk. The identity that Marcus had tentatively claimed was becoming real. Not because he had magically become disciplined, but because he was generating evidence every day of someone who showed up, someone who kept promises to himself, someone who moved, incrementally, in the direction of who he had decided to be. He still had hard days. He still missed occasionally. He still felt the pull of avoidance, the temptation to do the easier thing. But the relationship with those feelings had changed. They no longer felt like proof that he couldn't do it. They felt like the ordinary friction of a life, lived with intention, and he had learned to pass through them. Here is the truth about consistency, stated plainly: it is not a talent. It is not a gift. It is not something some people have and others lack. It is a practice. A set of decisions and structures and habits that, when applied with genuine commitment, produce reliable behavior over time, regardless of mood, regardless of circumstance, regardless of how motivated you feel on any given morning. You have spent time with these ideas today. Let me bring them together into something you can carry forward. Motivation will always be unreliable. This is not a problem to be solved. It is a reality to be accepted. Motivation is a visitor. Welcome it when it comes. Do not depend on it being there. Build your behavior on something that does not depend on how you feel. Resistance will always be present. The pull toward comfort, the voice of avoidance, the gravity of inaction. These are permanent features of the human experience. The disciplined person does not defeat resistance. They act in spite of it. They recognize it, name it, and proceed. They have learned that resistance is not a stop sign. It is a toll booth. You pay it in effort, in discomfort, in the willingness to begin even when the feeling is not there. And you continue. Systems are not restrictions. They are structures that hold your best intentions in place. When your worst moments try to overrule them, a good system makes the right behavior the easy behavior. It removes decisions. It reduces friction. It makes your environment an ally rather than an obstacle. Identity is the deepest lever. When you shift from "I am trying to be consistent" to "I am consistent." When you claim that identity and begin generating evidence for it through your daily choices, everything changes. You stop fighting yourself. You start expressing yourself. The behavior is no longer something you do reluctantly. It becomes who you are. And discipline, understood correctly, is not punishment. It is respect. It is treating your future self as someone worth showing up for. It is keeping the promises you made when your thinking was clear and your intentions were strong. And honoring those promises, even when the feeling has faded, because you have decided that your goals matter more than your moods. The results you want, the health, the skill, the finished work, the financial security, the relationships, the life. They are built in the ordinary moments, not in the extraordinary days when everything clicks and the motivation is running high. They are built in the unremarkable Tuesday mornings when you would rather stay in bed, in the Thursday evenings when you would rather scroll than practice, in the Sunday afternoons when you could rest and you choose, instead, to do the thing. Those moments are the real work. Those are the moments that separate the life you have from the life you want. And they are available to you every single day. You do not need to be different from who you are. You do not need a different personality, a different level of natural talent, a different starting point. You need a decision, a real one, about who you are and what that person does. And then you need to show up for that decision, again and again, imperfectly but reliably, in the moments when showing up is hard. That is what consistency is. That is what it requires. And that is what it produces. Not someday, starting now.